So I'd like to begin by giving a little background about who SLELO PRISM is. So the St. Lawrence Eastern Lake Ontario Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management, also known as SLELO PRISM, it is short for short, is one of 8 prisms that span the state of New York, creating a network of partnerships as an integrative approach to invasive species management. Stemmed from recommendations from the New York State Invasive Species Task Force, the PRISM network began back in 2008 and became fully established in 2013. The network is funded by the Environmental Protection Fund in coordination between the Department of Environmental Conservation and various host organizations. So SLELO PRISM, it encompasses the 5 counties of Oneida, Oswego, Jefferson, Lewis, and St. Lawrence. And we're hosted by the Nature Conservancy, and we collaborate with our partners to protect our lands and waters from the impacts of invasive species. I'd also like to explain what an invasive species is and what it isn't. So an invasive species is any plant, animal, or even a microorganism like COVID that causes harm to our environment, our economy, or our health. The term invasive species can be easily confused as there are many non-native species that are not considered to be invasive. For example, apples and many other agricultural plants are non-native species that are considered to be beneficial to our culture rather than harmful. There are also species that are considered to be a nuisance that are not invasive, like dandelions, for example. And you may wonder why some non-natives are so invasive. Well, this is because when a species is introduced to a new environment different than where they originated from, they enter the new area often free from environmental factors that keep their populations in balance, like natural predators or parasites. In addition, invasives often produce many offsprings or seeds. For example, one adult purple loosestrife plant can produce millions of seeds annually. Because of these characteristics, invasive populations often become widespread. So the bottom picture here shows invasive common reed, also known as Phragmites, filling an entire field with just a single shrub existing in that mass. In addition to lacking natural predators, invasive species also have attributes that allow them to thrive in environments that other species may not do so well in, such as poor soil conditions. Pictured on the top right shows invasive Japanese knotweed growing right out of a hole in concrete. So if invasives are so bad for the environment, then why are they here to begin with? Global trade has been a catalyst for many introductions of species from around the globe. Invasive insects like the emerald ash borer entered the US in wood of shipping crates, and the spotted lanternfly became established from eggs shipped on rocks from China. So many aquatic invasive species are introduced by ballast water of sea ships or are dumped into waterways as unwanted aquarium pets or unused bait, for example. Additionally, many plants that are now considered to be invasive were once considered desired ornamentals that were often intentionally introduced to our country. For example, pictured here is Japanese honeysuckle, an invasive plant that was often intentionally planted by gardeners to beautify their lawns or highway designers to control erosion and stabilize banks. However, over time, these non-natives often misbehave and they escape our gardens and they invade our natural areas where they outcompete native and desirable plant species, damaging entire ecosystems. Therefore, gardeners like you can play a very vital role in preventing the introduction and the spread of invasive plants. One of the biggest ways that you can help stop the spread of invasive plants is to choose to grow native plants. There is power in planting native species. Choosing native species not only reduces the spread of invasive plants, but also supports our native wildlife. This is because native plants have co-evolved with native wildlife and insects. There are many specialized relationships that exist between plants, birds, and pollinators. For example, monarch butterflies they need native milkweed to complete their life cycle. Invasive swallowworts can be mistaken for native milkweed by monarch butterflies, and larvae laid on invasive swallowwort, they don't survive. Furthermore, native birds like the chickadee, they rely on caterpillars to rear their young, and native plants, they support the caterpillars. So by choosing to grow native plant varieties in your garden, you are supporting birds and pollinators and other wildlife. So there are many resources available to learn what plants are native and climate smart to your region, all of which I'll briefly mention here, and as mentioned, we'll provide links in a follow-up email. The National Wildlife Federation has developed a tool to help you identify plants native to your zip code. The New York State DEC has developed brochures and plant lists that showcase plants that are native to the Northeast, and also what plants to avoid with native alternatives, and also a list of plants prohibited and regulated for sale in New York State. All sample pictures here. And the Northeast Regional Invasive Species and Climate Change, also known as RISC Management Group, has developed a brochure that outlines gardening for present and future conditions using native species adapted to both current and future hardiness zones, with a list of climate smart plants native to the Northeast. So all these are great resources that you can utilize that I'll send to you. Another way you can get involved is to take the Pledge to Protect, which is an outreach initiative that aims to protect our lands and waters from invasive species through engagement. So there are 5 pledge categories that can be taken. Lands and trails, which is themed for landowners and hikers. Forests, which is themed for forest owners or managers. Waters, which is themed for boaters, waterfront property owners, and water recreationists in general. Community, which is themed for those who live in urban areas. And gardens, which is themed for gardeners and landscapers like you. So upon taking the pledge, you become a protector and unlock the resources provided within the category that you have taken the pledge to protect. The resources that I showed you previously are examples of the type of information that would be provided for those who pledge to protect gardens. In addition to receiving helpful resources, protectors are sent monthly emails that provide specific but simple actions you can take to protect your favorite hiking trails, paddleways, garden, and community from invasive species. Right after taking the pledge, you get instant bragging rights along with collectible virtual badges, chances to win prizes, and for those of you who are on social media, you get access to a social media toolbox with pre-made graphics that you can share on your social networks to celebrate becoming a protector. To take the pledge, you just visit www.ipledgetoprotect.org, and there will also be a link to this website in your follow-up email. All right, so I'm just going to pause for just a quick moment here. Does anybody have any questions before I move on? Okay. So I'm going to switch gears now and provide an overview of general invasive species control methods. Okay, so invasive plants can be controlled by manual, mechanical, and chemical methods. So the bulleted sections in this graphic, they provide tips for each method. But in general, manual control, such as digging and hand pulling, is most effective on small invasive plant populations. And this is best done in the spring when plants are smaller and the soil is more loose. It is important to remove the root system and to avoid leaving behind plant fragments that may re-sprout. Mechanical methods such as mowing and cutting are effective for medium-sized invasive plant populations where hand pulling would be cumbersome. It's best to cut plants to ground level before flowering occurs, and mowing will likely need to occur multiple times throughout the growing season. So to avoid resprouting, remove clippings from the site and solarize them by placing them in a sunny spot for 2 weeks prior to disposal or composting. If there are remains with seeds, Be sure to place those remains in a black plastic bag tied up before you solarize it, so they don't get dispersed. And chemical methods are most effective on medium to large sized invasive plant populations, where mechanical methods are unfeasible. And it's very important to follow all chemical label instructions to ensure effectiveness and to avoid causing harm to the environment. Apply herbicides at peak growth before seed production, and fall is often the best time to apply herbicides to ensure the chemical is drawn down to the plant's root system. Treating plants should be undisturbed for 2 weeks and no disposal is required. Does anybody have any questions about the control methods before I move on? Okay. All right, so for the next few slides, I'll just showcase a few common invasive species that you may encounter in your yard, and also some species that are considered a high early detection priority that we're trying to raise awareness of. Also, I'd like to mention that if you happen to encounter any of the species I talk about today or other invasives that you encounter elsewhere, to please report them to imapinvasives.org, which is New York State's invasive species observation database. So reports can be made very easy using a mobile app from a smartphone, or you can report right online in the database using your web, like a desktop computer, by visiting the website nyimapinvasives.org. Also, this database is used by invasive species management professionals to strategize the management of invasive species. And you can receive one-on-one training on how to use IMAP with me. There will be a link to sign up for a training in the follow-up email that will be shared with you. So if you're interested in that, you'll have the opportunity to get involved. Okay, so the first species is wild parsnip. It is a perennial herbaceous plant that emerges in the spring. It is considered common and is often found growing along roadsides and yard edges. The main threat of wild parsnip is primarily to human health, as the sap from the plant will irritate the skin and may cause severe burns. Do not use a weed whacker on this plant, as it may cause the sap to contact your skin. So if you do mow the plant, be sure to wear long sleeves and pants and closed-toed shoes, and take care when removing clothing to avoid contact with your skin, because it will cause severe burning like pictured here. Wild parsnip leaves, they resemble the leaves of celery and have 2 defined sharply tooth-paired leaflets that grow along the stem. Stems are yellowish green in color with vertical grooves that can grow up to 5 feet tall. Flowers begin to emerge in late June. They are umbel-shaped and are a greenish yellow color as pictured here. Plants die after producing seeds, which can remain viable in the soil for up to 4 years. Invasive bush honeysuckle species are often seen growing along roadsides and yard edges, as they are one of the first plants to leaf out in the spring. Honeysuckle is one of those invasive plants that were once considered desirable ornamentals that I had mentioned earlier. Honeysuckle can shade out native plants and deplete the soil of moisture and nutrients. The seeds are readily dispersed by birds, but the fruit are carbohydrate rich and do not provide high enough fat content for long flights, causing a negative effect on birds. Some bush honeysuckle have allelopathic qualities that release chemicals into the soil, inhibiting the germination of nearby plants. So although it is beautiful, this is one that does cause ecological damage. There are several different species of invasive bush honeysuckle that are difficult to distinguish unless they are in flower or the seeds are present. Exotic honeysuckle leaves emerge 1 to 2 weeks before the leaves of native trees and shrubs, and don't drop until later in the fall. So this can be useful for identifying honeysuckle invasions in a forest. Bush honeysuckle leaves are simple and opposite. They are slightly fuzzy to the touch. The flowers are irregular and tubular and range in color from pink and white, and they turn yellow with age, or they're like a reddish purple color and they have a strong scent. Native honeysuckle have yellow flowers that have a reddish hue when they age, and they are not very fragrant. The fruit are red or orange berries, which are present in June and July, and October and November, depending on the species. Honeysuckle bark is shaggy and gray or tan in color. The twigs of all invasive honeysuckle species can be hollow. However, the twigs of native species tend to be less hollow with a white pith, whereas the exotic species are more obviously hollow with a brown pith. Okay, so Japanese barberry is another invasive plant that was considered a desirable ornamental. I see this growing in many people's yards. It is a small, compact, deciduous, spiny shrub that grows usually 3 to 6 feet tall with slightly curving branches. It is most common along woodland edges, fields, along roadsides, and also seen growing along fences. It spreads through horizontal lower branches that root freely and can quickly form dense stands in woodlands and forests and meadows and shade out native plants. The dense stands and sharp spines can make woodlands difficult to walk through for wildlife. Seeds are dispersed by birds and rabbits. The bark is brown, but the inner wood is yellow. Leaves form in clusters of rounded, untoothed, and they're about 1 to 2 inches long. They grow close to the branches, and the leaves appear early in the spring and turn reddish in the fall. Branches have distinctive sharp spines that grow off the stem beneath each leaf cluster. So do take care when manually removing this plant to avoid injury. Flowers are yellow and small, about 1/3 inch across in size, and grow single or in clusters of 2 to 4, and they bloom in late May. Fruit are bright red, egg-shaped berries, and they're about 1/3 inches long, and they grow in clusters or alone. The fruit mature in August and stay in the shrub through the winter, and the roots are yellow. Anybody have Japanese barberry in their yard? It's a pretty common one. Okay, and this is another one you probably have in your yard. Common buckthorn. It is an invasive tree or shrub that you likely have growing in your yard and commonly grows along roadsides and disturbed areas. There are 2 species with the common name buckthorn. Okay, there's glossy and common, but they're actually 2 different types of species with very similar attributes. So common buckthorn has black berries and leaves with serrated edges and curved veins, while glossy buckthorn have black to red berries and smooth leaf edges and straight veins. Glossy buckthorns prefer more moist soils, while common buckthorn is found in drier soil conditions. Both species have long thorns, orange sapwood, and raised lenticels on their bark. Glossy buckthorn have small white flowers, and common have small yellowish green flowers, and both bloom in May. So buckthorn species are very aggressive and produce very dense thickets that shade out herbaceous ground species and wildflowers. Buckthorn species provide shelter for invasive agricultural pests and pathogens like soybean aphids and oak crown rust. Buckthorn species also disrupt the balance of our natural world, pushing out desirable native understory plants and creating a dark, dense thicket. Their berries are easily spread long distances by birds and cause a laxative effect on wildlife that ingests them, which helps with seed dispersal. So if you're controlling buckthorn on your property, after you cut it down, it's very important to apply a glyphosate herbicide to the cut stump immediately after cutting it. If not, it makes the plant grow better. It's like a Medusa effect. It'll just resprout and resprout and resprout. If you want a non-chemical alternative, you can cut down the tree and leave about 6 inches of the stump. And then you can take a thick plastic black bag and put it over the stump and take a zip tie and zip tie the bag to the base of the stump, and then maybe put some mulch or something around the bag to keep the bag from blowing up, and that'll shade out the stump. There's mixed results with that technique. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But with buckthorn, if you cut it back, you have to either cover it with the bag or use glyphosate on it. You can just paint it right on with a paintbrush, or else it's just going to grow back even stronger than before. Okay. All right. Oh, did someone have a question? I heard a sound. No.
Well, what is is it glyphosate you said?
Oh, like Roundup.
Oh, the Roundup thing.
Yeah, I just used the actual name of the chemical.
Okay, because I have lots of buckthorn. Thank you.
Yep.
Even the Roundup doesn't.
Yeah, it's a tough one to get rid of, for sure. All right, so there's a critter on your screen here. So invasive jumping worms are one of those species we're wanting to raise awareness of and asking for you to report findings to IMAP, or just in general, you know, to the Cornell Cooperative Extension if you don't use IMAP. So jumping worm has been confirmed in Jefferson County recently, and it's also known to be in St. Lawrence and Oneida counties, and it is likely elsewhere and just hasn't been reported yet. So jumping worms are native to Korea, Taiwan, and Japan. There are 16 invasive jumping worm species in North America, 5 of which are invading forests and 3 that are most commonly found in the Northeast. All earthworms are actually non-native to North America, but not all are considered to be invasive. So often earthworms are considered to be beneficial to soil health. This is true for European earthworms in some places such as gardens and agricultural fields, but the opposite is true for earthworms in the forest. So unlike groomed gardens, forest plants, they've evolved under completely different conditions and grow much slower than garden plants in groomed settings. So in groomed settings, the soil is mostly used to grow annuals and can be fertilized when needed, right? So things are different in the forest, as forest plants rely on the nutrients that leaf litter puts into the soil. Invasive jumping worms, they feed on this leaf litter that reduces the nutrients available to replenish the soil and support the plants in the forest. So earthworm species can be very difficult to differentiate, but invasive jumping worms and European worms can be distinguished by their behavior and the appearance and the location of the cotylum, or that band that's near their head. So in jumping worms, the cotylum is milky white to gray in color. It forms tight to the body, similar to a corset, and it is located near the head of the worm or the non-flat part of the worm. While the European earthworms have raised reddish colored cotylum located more towards the middle of their bodies, and the biggest indicator is going to be the difference in their behavior when they are approached. As you see from this video, jumping worms do exactly what their name states. They wiggle and jump around vigorously, similar to a way a snake does when touched. And while earthworms are more slowly, and they stretch their bodies when they move. They just kind of inch along nice and slow. They don't wiggle around like this jumping worm does when it's touched. So to learn if you have invasive jumping worms in your garden, you can use mustard pour and draw worms to the surface. So you can do this easily by mixing a gallon of water with about 1/3 cup of ground yellow mustard seed, and then pour the solution into the soil. This will draw earthworms to the top of the soil, where you can look for the milky white, non-raised cotylum and fast movements of the invasive jumping worm. If you do find jumping worms, collect a specimen and then destroy what you don't collect and report your findings. The best thing to do is report the observation to the database I mentioned earlier, IMAP Invasives. But if you can't do that, please do take photos, note the location, and contact your local Cornell Cooperative Extension and give them the sample to confirm the finding. So there is no best management practice for jumping worms. So the best approach is to is to actually just try to prevent their spread. And there's a few steps that you can take to do this. So don't buy jumping worms and use them as bait. Not only would it spread them, but they're not really a good candidate to be bait. They are high in heavy metals and the fish don't like the taste, and they don't really stay on the hook because they move around so much. Also, the cocoons are visible to the human eye. So whenever possible, buy bare root plants and then rinse off the soil into a bucket before planting them in your yard. And if you're doing plant sharing, it's really important to do that, you know, if before you give the plant to your friend, or if it's not cleaned off before you get it, then you take this step and you spray off the roots before you plant it in your own yard. Also, don't buy jumping worms for vermiculture. Use red wigglers instead. And piles of yard waste make the perfect habitat for jumping worms. So if you can, try to avoid dumping yard waste in natural areas. And if you do use compost, be sure to buy compost that has been heated to 104 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 days and has been sitting around a known jumping worm infestation. And you can reach 104 degrees easily by leaving the bagged compost in the sun for 3 days before you apply it. And if you can, it's best to make your own compost. And just check for signs. You can look for the granular soil. It tends to look kind of like coffee grounds when the jumping worm is present, because it's eating the leaf litter and just depleting the soil of that nutrients. And if you see worms on the ground in your yard, if you poke them with a stick or your toe, they'll move around wildly, like that video that I showed you earlier. And then that's a true sign that you've got jumping worm. And you can always make that mustard drench as well. Okay. The spotted lanternfly, or SLF for short, is an invasive plant hopper that was introduced to the US from egg masses that came over on rocks from Asia. Spotted lanternfly threatens a wide variety of plants such as hops, grapevine, walnut fruit trees, maple trees, which makes early detection of spotted lanternfly a very high priority in New York State. SLF is established in northeastern states, including Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, Virginia, and West Virginia. And it has been found in New York State near New York City and also in Ithaca. And the spread potential for this insect is very, very high because it can easily hitchhike on vehicles. And they also like to lay their eggs on nearly any flat surface. So your wheel, on campers, on camping gear, any furniture left outside, they'll lay their eggs on it. So the appearance of SLF changes depending on their life cycle stage. So the early stage are nymphs, and they're black with white spots, and then they turn red with white spots just before they transform into a winged adult, which you can see in the bottom middle photo here, the nymphs there. Adults are about 1 inch long and about a ½ inch wide, so they're pretty big, and they have grayish colored forewings with red hind wings with black spots. They're very colorful. Their upper wing portions are dark with white stripes, as you can see pictured on the top and the bottom here. So the adult SLF appear in July. In the fall, they lay their eggs, which are about 1 inch long with a have like a smooth brownish gray waxy appearance over them. Underneath that waxy appearance, which you can see here from this photo, are the eggs. So this waxy stuff, see it here on the top, the adults laying their eggs, and then they cover the egg with this waxy stuff. But if you peel back some of that waxy fluid there, you can see that they're these little raised brown rows. And that's what their eggs look like. And you can find them on like tree bark, railroad rails, fences, rocks, pretty much anywhere. So the tree of heaven, this is an invasive deciduous tree native to China and Taiwan, and it was intentionally introduced to the US as an ornamental shade tree. Tree of heaven helps advance the spread of the spotted lanternfly. as it is known to be one of the preferred host trees of spotted lanternfly. So that's why I'm mentioning it for you today. So tree of heaven is an aggressive root system, has an aggressive root system that can damage pavement and sewers and building foundations. It's really a weed tree. It also reproduces very quickly, and it secretes a chemical in the soil that inhibits the growth of the plants near it. You might notice that there's a trend of many invasive plants having that allelopathic property. So it can grow really quickly, reach heights of about 80 feet up to 6 feet in diameter, or between 80 and 6 feet in diameter. The leaves are pinnately compound with many leaflets, like 10 to 40 leaflet pairs, and they have an alternate arrangement. The leaflets have smooth edges and 2 or more granular teeth at the base that give off a very foul odor. The leaf scar is V-shaped and light brown. The branches have a corky pith, and it has a burnt peanut butter odor when you crush the leaves. The bark is smooth and brownish green while young, and then it eventually turns light brown to gray in color, and it kind of looks like the skin of cantaloupe, like the fruit. The seeds are numerous and only found on the female trees, and the samaras are winged with a single seed and grow in very large clusters that you can often see still attached even in the winter months. So that's a dead giveaway. So if you do see a tree of heaven, take a moment and just look for the egg masses of the spotted lanternfly on the bark, or for spotted lanternfly adults, and report if you find tree of heaven and if you find the spotted lanternfly. Okay, so that's everything I have for you today. If anybody has any questions or would like to share anything, you're welcome to take the floor.
What's the best way to get rid of Japanese knotweed?
Oh, don't plant it. No. So yeah,
House.
yeah, they call it devil weed for a reason. It's very, very hard to get rid of. I mean, I've had friends literally bury it in like stone, and somehow it still meanders its way out of the top of the stack of stone. So the best thing to do is like with buckthorn, when you cut it back, you have to treat it. So if you cut it all down in the springtime and then just keep cutting it down, so it's like shorter in the fall, then you can do a foliar spray pretty easily without having to spray up too high, and it just makes it easier to apply the foliar spray if you cut it back in the spring and summer, so then it's not very high in the fall when you spray it. Or if you don't have a very large patch and you have the time, you can inject it with glyphosate, and that'll also work, and it'll be a more selective way to treat the infestation, whereas if you're doing a foliar spray, whatever the chemical gets on, it's going to kill it. So those are the ways you can get rid of it, is just cutting it back and treating it, and you're going to have to do it for a long time, like 7 years probably, to get rid of it finally. You can also, when you cut it back and treat it, and after that 2-week period of treating it, you could always plant like bigger shrubs or, you know, like trees and things like that around the area in which you treated, because that'll shade it out. It doesn't do as well in the shady areas after you've cut it back and treated it. So it's always a good idea to do that anyway. If you're going to remove an invasive, it's always a great idea to plant a native species in the treatment area of the removal. You just got to time it out. You obviously don't want to do it right after you've treated the area with chemicals. Just wait a couple of weeks before you do it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's everywhere. It's in my neighbor's yard, and I tried telling her that, you know, it's going to cause problems. It's right along the side of her house, and I told her it could cause problems to the foundation and the water lines and stuff. And sure enough, she told me like last season they had problems with it growing into their water lines and had to dig it up and replace water lines. So don't want it near your house.
They planted it around the foundation.
Yeah, it was there when they bought it.
Ate it.
Yeah, that's what happened. It was growing right next to the house, like, you know, like a decorative plant.
Mhm.
And when I send out the follow-up email, I will put a link in there too for the SLELO PRISM Invasive Species Workbook, which features all the species I talked about today and lots more. And Japanese knotweed is in there, and it goes over the threats, how to identify it, and management techniques that I mentioned today as well. And you could have that digitally as a reference. And for anybody who wants a physical copy, I could mail them to you. If Leslie wants to just take names and addresses of those who want a copy of it, and just give it to me, and I'll send it out in the mail to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What's the best way to get rid of bindweeds?
Of what?
Bindweed.
Bindweed.
Bindweed?
Morning glory thing.
Yeah,
Wild morning glories.
Are you talking about bindweed?
bind, yeah.
Oh, I don't think that's, so I am knowledgeable on invasive species. I think that's an example of one of those nuisance species that we just don't like because they irritate us. So I'm not an expert on that, but when I find it, I just kind of pluck it out. I just pluck it out of the soil and just keep on plucking.
What's the best way to deal with garlic mustard, especially if it's in and out of woods?
Yeah, so garlic mustard is one of those species that there's actually been research done, and I'll include this in the follow-up email too, this study that I'm going to talk about. But it's one of those species that they've learned is best if it's in a natural setting, like in a forested area, and there's a large infestation. You're going to cause more damage removing it than just letting it run its course. It will eventually die back on it naturally. If it's in your yard and you don't have a huge abundance of it growing, you can just pull it out of the ground and you can treat it if you want to. That's fine. But if you're in a forested setting, it does cause more damage to get in there and rip it out of the ground, because then you're getting into probably moving lots of other things that are in the ground there. And it can actually make it so it becomes more widespread in a forested setting. So if it's in your yard, just go ahead and pluck it out. It's one of those plants that you're going to want to pluck out of the ground. Like right now is the best time to do it, because it does go into bloom earlier in the season. Like it's going to go into bloom in May, and then it'll have the seeds, and the seeds will drop. So you want to pluck it out as soon as you see it.
I found that if I pull it up and it's got even little flower buds on it, 3 weeks later, those flower buds are flowering and setting seed. Even though the plant's
Yeah,
out.
you want to get it before you see flowers. So right now, go out there and just start pulling it out of the ground. That's what I do in my yard too. And again, planting something else in the spot where you pull it out is going to help to naturally compete with it. Because a lot of times the garlic mustard will show up in areas, in disturbed areas, and then it just spreads really quickly.
How about lesser celandine? Is that invasive considered?
I'm not familiar with that one.
Pretty yellow flowers.
I'd have to see a picture maybe.
Okay, I'll send.
Yeah, full disclosure, I'm not a horticulturalist or a botanist.
I know it was me.
I have where I live, back in my house, there's the small yard, there's this grapevine, it's like a grapevine, and it just, my neighbor, and then it just took over the yard, like, I mean, and I don't know, but, what we did was build like a small fence, put a fence there, and then, locks, like, to try to, but every spring it starts, coming into the yard, like, just, I don't know, it looks like big grape leaves or something that,
Yeah, it probably is native grape.
Yeah.
If you
but there's
have you
no-
ever noticed any berries on it, like that look like like they're like a bluish purple color with like little speckles on it, and they have like a porcelain sheen to them.
I'll check, I'll double.
Yeah, if you see that, then that could be a pepper vine or porcelain berry. And that's an invasive woody vine that is not very widespread in the SLELO region, but is found in more southern parts of the state. And we would definitely want to know if it's porcelain berry, because we want to remove that if it's porcelain berry. But the leaves look very similar to grape. I can show you a picture real quick if you want to just wait a second, and I can grab it. So you can tell me if this is the plant you saw.
She's gonna show a picture.
Okay.
I have our website open conveniently here, so I can just go right to the webpage for porcelain berry and show you what it looks like. Okay, so this actually would be good to show you. So our website is SLELO Invasives. Is SLELOinvasives.org. Right, and then if you go to the invasive species tab and then the tiered list, you'll see all these species profiles here. And porcelain berry is right here. So this is what porcelain berry looks like. So the leaves can be simple with serrated edges, or they can be deeply lobed, and they can be, the two leaf types can be on the same branch. So they could be variated in the leaf type. But this right here is the biggest indicator in mature porcelain berry plants. They look just like a shiny porcelain. That's why they're called porcelain berry. And they're a bluish purple color. And this would happen in like October, these berries.
Oh, I don't check for it.
Yeah.
Like, it's in the spring, like it's really wild.
Yeah. But another way to tell if it's a native grape, then the bark is going to be, it's very shaggy bark, and it peels real easy, like in parallel lines. But the bark on the porcelain berry, it doesn't peel in those narrow strips, and there's lenticels or like raised pores on the bark. And you could see here from the picture, the pith, like the center of the branch, the woody branches, they are brown in the middle if they're wild grape, or they're white if it's porcelain berry. Like the center is white instead of brown. But anyhow, so I'd have to see a picture of whatever it is that you're describing to identify it.
Picture of it. Bring it.
Or a specimen.
If it was a wild grape, how do you get rid of it?
Gotta get
Well,
the-
wild grape is native, so I'm not, that's not anything that I have learned about, but I would assume it'd be the same way with most of the woody plants. You just got to cut it back. And if it's growing, so woody vines, if you cut them back like close to the ground, you can just leave whatever's up in the tree. You don't have to like try to yank that stuff down. It'll eventually fall off the tree and decompose. But just cut it, down at the ground, and it'll die. And you can also paint some glyphosate or Roundup on it, on the cut part.
I don't want to use.
Requires monitoring and cutting it back and then growing something else. It's native there, like maybe trumpet vine. I mean, I've heard that can be a nuisance too, but it's native.
Any other questions?
Is New York State outlawed Bradford pears?
Are Bradford pears outlawed in New York State?
Are they allowed?
Outlaw.
I think they're on that list. I can open it up real quick and show you what I'm talking about. There's a New York State list of prohibited and regulated plants. Not my. I think I saw it on there, but let me double check.
I bet you can still buy
Yeah, and I'll put a link to that list that I'm talking about. I'll put it in the follow-up email so you'll get it. Just taking me a minute to find where I stuck it. 1 second. Actually, here, I'll show you this. So remember earlier when I mentioned the pledge to protect and the resources that are available when you take the pledge? This is the Garden Protectors Toolbox that I have open here, and there is a plethora of resources in here that you could take advantage of. They're right on our website. You can get to them today. But that's where I'm going to find this. It's on here. Oh, here it is, right here. So this prohibited and regulated plants list. And this is enforced too. Oh, that's the wrong thing. Why is that happening? Okay, well, I found a glitch on my website. I'm gonna have to fix that. I'll just go to the DEC website.
How about purple loosestrife? We have that in the garden at Ronald McDonald House that our club takes care of.
Yeah, purple loosestrife has been around for a while. That's definitely an invasive wetland invader. What's the question specifically? Like how to control it, or? It's being controlled throughout the state by biocontrol, which is the what?
An easy way to get rid of it?
Well, it's actually being controlled in New York State through biocontrol, which there's a Gallorusella beetle that will feed on it, and there's releases of Gallorusella beetles done throughout the state. We actually do some releases of them. It's like one of the best ways to control it. But just cutting it down, repeated cutting. And it's a wetland invader, so it's a nasty one because since it's in a wetland usually or near water, you can't really control it with chemicals because of regulations, and you need permitting and whatnot for things like that. But this is the list. I'm not sure if you're seeing it. Are you seeing the list?
Yes.
Yeah, this is what it looks like. It's online, and you can see here it just has, you know, what's prohibited, which means it can't be sold at all. And then what's regulated, meaning that it can be sold, but it can't be introduced into natural areas. That makes sense. Oh, I guess the Bradford pear is not on there. I don't see it. So I guess it's not on there like I thought it was. Yeah. That answers the question about that.
Anything else?
Just a question about the jumping. What's the best way to dispose of them?
Could you hear that, Megan? How do you dispose of
What's the best way to get rid of the jumping?
jumping worms? What do you?
Yeah, so there's no known control methods for it. So earlier I was talking about prevention. So purchasing root, like bare root plants, or being sure to rinse bare root plants in a bucket before you plant them in your yard or share plants with others.
Well, if you find them though.
If you find them, the best thing to do is report it. Report it and keep a specimen in a container so you can give it to the Cornell Cooperative Extension or whomever it is you're reporting it to, so they can identify it. But there's no known control method for it. That's why we're trying to let folks know, buy bare root and rinse the soil off of the roots. It can easily be in plants that you just buy from anywhere, really. So taking it out of the soil, rinsing the roots, and then planting it is the best approach. Or doing that mustard pour, the mustard pour. Like if you buy a new plant, you could do a mustard pour right on in the pot. And if you see them come up, then you can pluck them out of there and then know that they're there and then get rid of that soil and rinse off the roots, and then you can plant your plant.
So what do you do with the rinse water?
With the rinse water, well, you don't want to dump it back
Yeah.
in your yard.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not really sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess you could just like let them drown and then dispose of the rinse water. They can't breathe in water for too long.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Megan. This was great. Yeah, really